We'd like to welcome to our midst our honoured guests, the Prime Minister of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, the Honourable Ranil Wickremesinghe, the Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Samantha Ranatunga, the Minister of Finance, Honourable Ravi Karunanayake, Deputy Minister Dr. Harsha De Silva, also Dr. Hans Vijay Surya, Deputy Vice Chairman, Mr. Rajendra Tyagaraja, Vice Chairman, Mr. Suresh Shah, the past Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Mangala Yapa, Secretary General CEO of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. For 175 years, one of the oldest chambers in South Asia, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, has been a formidable voice for business in Sri Lanka. Today, as its 16th Economic Summit, as it has in the past at this, its flagship event, it discusses, debates, and disseminates macro issues that impact the future of the country in an increasingly evolving global milieu. Over the next 2 days, salient focus areas will be thrown open in moving Sri Lanka towards a $50 billion export economy, vital to optimize the country's capabilities, competencies, harness talents, and maximize its potential. In this room are spearheads of the country's future, decision makers, policy makers, public sector champions, and corporate stewards who will strategize and charter that vital framework for the country to move ahead. So welcome to the Sri Lanka Economic Summit 2015 on the theme Towards Exports of $50 billion. Making the welcome address is the Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, who is also the Managing Director and CEO of CIC. He holds a degree from the University of Delhi and an MBA from UK. He sits on the boards of a number of companies within the CIC group, including AkzoNobel, Lanka Paints, and Rahim Afroz CIC Agro Bangladesh, in addition to being an independent director of Ceylon Bank and a non-executive director of Chemonex. Please welcome the Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Samantha Ranatunga.
Your Excellency, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, Honourable Prime Minister of Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, Honourable Ravi Karunanayake, the Minister of Finance, Ministers, past Chairman, foreign dignitaries, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the 16th Annual Economic Summit of the Chamber 2015. Our theme this year is a very ambitious one, towards exports of $50 billion. As ambitious as it might be, if we look around us and see what our neighborhood is, we see that we have fallen way short in an absolute priority area for this country. If we don't give a boost to exports, we are not going to survive to move to the future. A country like Vietnam, which recovered from a war, exports today $128 billion of exports compared to what we exported of $11.8 billion last year. There's not much to talk about Singapore. They export nearly over $500 billion. So if we look at what is around us, we have thought that this is an opportune area for us to focus on. And taking the real chamber style into account, we have lined up today for a period of 2 days some of the finest speakers and thinkers who will talk on export strategy, export finance, the role sustainability plays in exports, and also look at and share stories of some of the best practices of exports, which I think would be educational as well as inspirational for the people who are here. I think it's an area of national priority, and if we get together and we work in using some of the aspects which will be discussed in this forum, it would hold this country to good stead. Whilst thanking Tia and the Chamber team for putting together this two-day seminar, I again welcome you to this flagship event of the Chamber. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ranatunga. Just a few housekeeping announcements before we begin the inaugural session, so to speak, the discussion part of the inaugural session. We'd appreciate if all mobile phones are switched off or kept on silent, and do refrain from answering any calls while you're in the room. Morning tea or morning refreshments will be served outside in the foyer, and lunch upstairs in the atrium. Also, if you do have any questions for each of the sessions, there are question slips on your table. Do feel free to write in whatever questions you want to, and to address it to the panelists who you will want your question answered, and give it to one of the chamber staff who are around the room. They're easily identifiable. Thank you. I'd now like to invite, firstly, our moderator for the inaugural session, Mr. Suresh Shah, who's a past chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and her panelists, the Prime Minister, Honourable Ranil Wickremesinghe, and the Minister of Finance, Honourable Ravi Karunanayake.
Good morning, everyone. We are privileged to have with us this morning the Honourable Prime Minister and the Honourable Minister of Finance to inaugurate the 2015 Sri Lanka Economic Summit of the Ceylon Chamber. The Prime Minister will make the keynote address this morning, after which we'll have a short Q&A, and please write in your questions and send it up, and we will take as many as possible during the allotted time. So without taking your time up further, I'm privileged to invite the Prime Minister to address you this morning. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, the Chairman, and the members of the Chamber of Commerce, my Deputy Minister, distinguished guests, and friends. I need not dwell into the history of the Chamber of Commerce. Rather than that, I thought I'd say a few words on your topic and towards an export of 50 billion US dollars. Well, that happens to fit within our plans of a new country in 60 months. I think we've performed the first part of our duties when we made President Maithripala Sirisena to take over the country, of establishing good governance in 100 days, and we got the economy moving. Now we've done something unusual. We've taken our plans for 5 years. When many of you are asking what is the government doing, we felt we were a caretaker government with a limited program of 100 days. But we drafted up, we got our plans ready. And when elections were called, we just trimmed it, got it dressed up by our media people, and we presented that as the election manifesto. There are no promises, just what we are going to do. A new country in 60 months, focusing on the 5 key factors for our country to go forward. And that is the economy, infrastructure, ensure establish and consolidate our freedoms, do away with corruption, develop education. What's our goal? Our goal is to provide 1 million jobs, new jobs in 5 years, well-paid jobs, whether it's in employment or self-employment, to raise the income of our people. We are stagnated too long as a low middle income country. It's the time we went forward. We should be bold if we are to resolve the issues of the country. So I am putting that forward. And we'll act according to these programs. How the exports will come with 50 billion or more will be done, because we believe that to do so, we must be a highly competitive social market economy based on sustainable development. Highly competitive social market and sustainable development. Let me repeat that again. And that means that this 50 billion is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of work. Firstly, it's a question of mindset, a change of mindset in the private sector. Nowhere else. From crony capitalism, are we going to the next generation of reforms? People want jobs, people want incomes, people want social mobility. Are we providing that or not? If you are doing so, we have to be open. We have to do the next round of reforms. How some of you will judge it, I do not know. Some will look at it as being painful for themselves. Pain in the country has to be shared if we are all to grow. It cannot be imposed on a larger section of the people only. So firstly, if we are to be an export economy, we must be outward looking. We can't talk of import substitution and ask for $50 billion. Well, the peak of Sri Lanka's economy, we've been a trading nation from Anuradhapura time to Polonnaruwa. We've been trading, dominating the trade in the Bay of Bengal and even up to China. So that's what we should be. When some of our nationalists say import substitution, it reminds me of the dark chocolate. It's quite nice and dark inside, but remember the cream is white. So where are we going? Do you want to have the so-called pseudo-nationalist dark chocolates, or are we providing employment for 1 million of our young people? Then we need the markets. We thought we can manage without the European market. We were proved wrong. Fortunately, I am in the small minority that said we needed the markets. So we had to now negotiate for GSP+. Before that, we had to get the EU ban on fisheries removed, which we are working on. And GSP+ means after September, when you move towards reconciliation, and we take sufficient action that Sri Lanka goes off the Geneva radar once and for all. That's a big market. We are talking on the free trade agreement with China. That is necessary, but it can't be low value-added products, as the Chinese said. It must be high value. Are we going to utilize the market next door or not? I've got to think very, very hard on that. That's the biggest market. That's a growing market of all these. The demographics favor the Indian market over the European and the Chinese market. The other growing market is the US market, which we'd have to tackle after the 2016 elections in the United States. If we have those markets and a free trade agreement with India and the development of free trade in South Asia, then I would say that we have the biggest market possible, and we have to ensure that we are competitive and we are attractive. This is the work we have to do. If we are to do so, we must get on to the next generation of reforms, which Asia has been missing out, the factor markets. This is where you find the meeting of politicians and businesses. A sort of a very convenient place. I have nothing against the meeting of politicians and businesses, but it should be with all the reforms that we are going to undertake in the factor market. Those are necessary. Once those reforms are taking place, we have to also promote foreign investment seriously. Investment that's available in many sectors. There may be a few sectors that may be limited to foreign ownership, but we can't be having a negative list that looks very much like the pages of the daily news, too long and in small letters. So let's decide where we are going. Decide we are going to be a niche market exporter, remember that. So we can make it. Thirdly, the role of the government. Government has a role in the economy, especially in a social market economy, is to lay down the rules, ensure it's being enforced, not to become competitors with the private sector. There will be some other firms which will be owned by the government, I think. There's general consensus in Parliament. But then there must be a level playing field, and you can't be going to the government to get permission for everything you do, or to bargain your way, and decide how much of money is needed to even pass a permission to get a permit to put up a building. All that has to go away. And that's what we are seriously looking at. With this in mind, we'll be presenting a series of legislation, the Development Special Provision Law, the Development Coordination Boards in the districts, so that there are no wastage of public funds on district work, the collection of revenue, which has to be increased. This will be some of the new legislation that will be brought into the next Parliament. It also means Development Special Provision Law will give the government powers for 3 years to cut through all the red tape and give us time to establish or restructure some of the existing authorities. How many organizations do we have handling exports? And how much do we export? How many people are promoting investments? What are the investments we have? So these are serious questions. And unless you are willing to bite the bullet, you are not going to make it. In order to ensure there are large investors coming in, we are having economic development areas. Within that, we will cluster 3 or 4 investment promotion zones that will reduce the cost of infrastructure, make it easier for us to control pollution and ensure that the environment is protected. We are looking at 2 major ones around Western Province. One is from Kuliapitiya to Divulapitiya, other is around Horana, Avisavella, which we call Raigama. So there are 2 big areas. Then there will be another one for logistics, linking up the port and the airport in Colombo. And finally, one for financial services, which will be specially legislated. So these will be the 4 ones that will be coming in within this area. Hambantota, Tissamaharam, Hambantota, Trincomalee, Candia, the other areas we've looked at together with Jaffna. We'll be having 2, we are looking initially at 2 economic development zones for tourism. And those will include one which will go from Dedua in Bentora to Valigama, other the cultural triangle, high spending tourists to spend 7 days, give sufficient activities. IT, technology will be promoted in these economic development zones. But we also have 22 economic development areas for agriculture, which is to promote export-oriented agriculture with agri-clinics and the backup. So we have decided how we are going to become competitive. We've got a time period to work it out. We've got to make the best use of the government services that are available. The biggest project we have, which is one of our infrastructure project, is the Western Megapolis. We run on large cities. If any Asian country wants to develop, you need a large city. You can't run only with Colombo. So we look at the highly developed Western province. In 2004, we had the plan of converting into a megapolis of 8 million people. That's what we need. We can beautify Colombo more, but Colombo's population won't increase. And when we do that, we look at education, and 500,000 housing units to be promoted by the public and private sector to be available to the people, especially to the middle class and the working class. Just imagine if the employees of your companies live 1 hour closer to Colombo, what the difference should be. Why shouldn't they own those properties? We want to encourage the small ownership, a strong middle class, and this is why we'll be giving freehold to all lands issued on permits from 1931, where people have stayed for over 10 years, whether it be land for agriculture, land for building houses, or even flats. Just imagine over 2 to 2.5 million freehold titles coming onto the market. In the sense, it makes a big difference in the land areas and to the economy itself. It doesn't mean people are going to sell or they are going to be forced to sell, but 2.5 million more legal titles added on. So these are part of the programs we have. But then we've got to remember the demographics. I think we are peaked and finished. We have to recognize that in the coming few decades, maybe after 2030, our population, the younger population, will reduce. Then our whole economy and our workforce must be dedicated to ensuring the maximum productivity and the maximum returns, which means a highly skilled workforce, even going on to robotics. That goes back to 13 years of education. I still think it's cheaper to keep a student in school for 13 years than to look at all the corrective actions we have to take when he leaves earlier. I've been the Minister of Youth Affairs. I've been the Minister of Education. It also means 13 years of schooling, and then either vocational training, colleges of technology, and job market-oriented degrees, good degrees, quality degrees. Education must be the driver of our economic activity, and make funding available on easy terms or as grants for students, ensure housing facilities are available for them. But people look on education as social mobility, and upward mobility comes through education. We cannot hinder that in any way, and a special program for the teaching of English. So let's go get through these. These are what activities we should have done long ago. And of course, demographic means that more and more women have to come into the workforce and to get to the top, not only at the bottom. Once you've done education, the infrastructure, and economy, people ask, what about corruption? All good economies have a low tolerance on corruption. They have no corruption or very little corruption. Now, we have to get there. There can't be favors in this. You have to be competitive. You can't protect that your own base, your own market. We want a highly competitive economy, therefore highly competitive firms and enterprises. No other way. Then only can you get the $50 billion. Now, I didn't put the target, the Chamber of Commerce has fixed the target. I am just telling you the hard facts of how you get there. And a free society. We always thought that at the end of the war, an authoritarian ruler will get us through. War has ended. The rule of the authoritarian, we got nowhere. If you want to develop, you must have an open society. A society that is capable of agreeing on the broad national policies and then arguing on the periphery, which we haven't done, where there should be more than one political party. We do have more than one political party. So we have to move there. Are we prepared to move there? Remember that only 2 countries in Asia have achieved that, in East Asia. One is Japan, other is Korea. They have the stability. India has the democracy. They're trying to move forward, but a constitution based on socialist principles have made it that much more difficult for the government to act. All other countries have still to face the reality of what is our political system going to be. The Chinese are thinking of what it should be. Malaysians and the Thais hasn't thought of it. So if you want to go ahead, we must have a consensus-oriented system. This is what we call Yahapalane. What I am presenting as our policy program is for the parliament, once the people accept it, ask the parliament to work on it. Every party will not be in government, but by having oversight committees chaired by members of all parties, they can review the work of government and then get involved. We're also looking at the local authorities having executive committees instead of the single chairman, and whether the provincial councils, the board of ministers should reflect the proportion of representation in parliament. So at the lower levels, there's a need to work together. So this is some of the ideas we have for Sri Lanka. All this is necessary if you have to have $50 billion of export or more. And that concerns your future. I know many of you, there are some who will agree with me, some who won't, but this country has to go forward. We have suffered enough. And if we are staying back, it is by choice that we have opted to do so. Not that fate is against us. We went ahead even during the war. There are no reason why we can't go ahead now. With peace, racial, religious harmony, unity, and the correct economics and the political systems, we can get ahead. We are capable of it. So I have asked the country to endorse such a program, and let's have a go at it. We cannot fail. We can only go up. So that's what I thought of speaking, and I found that your topic was more or less in line with what we have been thinking and advocating. So I must thank you again for inviting me, and let me conclude my speech.
You spoke of a number of things, a million jobs, income levels for our people, move beyond mid-income level country, FDI, megapolis, a mindset change, particularly in the private sector, next generation of reforms. You also touched on boldly addressing the challenges that we have, and that really brings me to my first question. I will take a few questions from the audience as well, so please write them in. But to start off, sir, a 26-year-old armed conflict may have ended, but Sri Lanka still suffers from distrust amongst the communities. Unfortunately, politicians from both sides of the divide, you being a notable exception, continue to use ethnic tensions as a route to elected office. My question to you, from a purely economic perspective, how important is it that we resolve these ethnic tensions? And how do you propose to do so without compromising national security?
Firstly, it is very important that we resolve the ethnic tension. Sri Lanka has become notorious for its ethnic crisis, and people are looking at that broad, and even here, if we are to genuinely be a stable government and have long-term policies, you must first tackle this issue. I think we played this game too long. The war is over. The LTT has been defeated. And all communities now want to go forward. This is why Maithripala Sirisena was made president of Sri Lanka, to bring everyone together. And the minority groups, the religious groups, all are working on it. If you look at this government, on one hand you have the TNA, you have the Muslim parties, the parties represent the hill country Tamils, the parties represent the Sinhalese, then the major parties, all are there. So we are moving forward. Now we've got to address the issues that arise from the Geneva, the UN Human Rights Report in Geneva. Now, first and foremost, it's useless blaming the diaspora or anyone. Who went and made the agreement with Ban Ki-moon? President Mahinda Rajapaksa. No one else. Then who on earth went and moved a motion in Geneva congratulating Sri Lanka? The Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka asked its friendly neighbors. So we moved the resolution. We came to an agreement. We went before the Darusman Committee and had a discussion with them. And the then Foreign Minister GLPDs wrote a letter encouraging them. So now they are asking, stand up and tell us what you are doing. We only want you to stand by the resolution that you have presented. There are no question of war trials. I didn't sign the Statute of Rome. But people want to know, is our judiciary working? And that's a valid question which we ourselves asked at the presidential election. And the people's resounding answer was no. So we are putting the judiciary together. We are setting up a permanent office on disappeared persons for the future. We put together a judicial mechanism, a domestic mechanism, which will get the confidence of all the communities, plus the international community, talking with South Africa about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But there's a long-term one, the psychological damage done to people, the women-headed families, and remember in Mullaitivu and Kilinochchi, people who have seen the last stages of the war. We just haven't got enough people to deal with them, to give them psychological counseling that is necessary. But we are determined to go ahead and resolve the political issues within the framework of a unitary country. What exactly is national security? What is it that we are compromising? No one wants to compromise. When Mr. Rajapaksa went and signed an agreement with Prabhakaran in 2005, did he think on national security? So I think that's not a question that should be asked from the UNP. When you finish the war and you bring the KP back again, do you think it's national security? National security is when the country is united, the country is firm, so there are no internal threats. The world still has to face today external terrorist threats. We have to remember that. And looking at our armed forces today, remember, for the first time, we have mounted a relief operation on our own. While we have to overcome September, the world has officially recognized that we have a role to play, both in the UN peacekeeping and permanently looking at this part of the Indian Ocean and its maritime security.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to something that the private sector is interested in. Sri Lanka is currently ranked 99th in the ease of doing business rankings of the World Bank. From experience, we in the private sector can confirm that Sri Lanka is not an easy place to do business. Bureaucrats prefer not to take decisions. We need to run behind politicians. Systems and processes are outdated, and rent-seeking has become a norm. Indeed, the difficulties in doing business is one reason why Sri Lanka has found it difficult to attract FDI, even at the conclusion of the war. How do you propose to improve ease of doing business in Sri Lanka? How do you propose to institutionalize the systems and processes that will make doing business in Sri Lanka a pleasure?
Firstly, when the UMP government was there, you didn't have these problems. These restrictions were built not only by politicians and bureaucrats, but part of the business community also. As far as we are concerned, the Development Special Provisions Act will give us, enable us to coordinate the activities of all government agencies. And my idea is that any investment proposal should get a reply within 40 days. And we will ease up on the others, getting building permits. We are working with the Environment Authority. So there will be one center which will have effective control over all the business activities of granting permission for only 3 years. Otherwise, that becomes a bureaucracy by itself till we remedy the situation in the different government's departments, streamline it. And at the moment, there are too many departments to go to get permission. One unit can look after all the environmental clearances. One should look after water, electricity. So there should be only 3-4 agencies which you will have to deal with. And we'll get your ideas on how we should be formed as we go along. But we are looking at 40 days first, and then maybe much less. But I'm sure within 2 years, we can really go up to about the 50th place.
Minister Karunanayak, if I might turn to you for a minute. Sri Lanka's exports as a percentage of GDP has declined significantly from about 30% in the early 1990s to around 15% in 2014. Our basket of exports has remained the same, garments, tea, rubber, gems, and our export markets have not diversified either. To fast-track export growth, a 5-fold increase is what the Chamber is calling for. Where will you focus, diversifying our export basket or broad-basing our export markets? And what tools will you use to implement whichever of the strategies that you adopt?
Thank you, Suresh, for giving me the opportunity today. I think our Prime Minister has set the score as to what the overview of the economy would be, and in the process, placed as to what the export sector should play in that overall economic center. I would basically say we have some fantastic companies in Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, they don't exert themselves. The problem that we have, the input costs are far too high. And these are the areas that we need to correct ourselves. The input costs need to be brought to realistic levels, then open out the markets. I think this is one of the biggest problems that we have. Our internal markets are too small. So that has been a policy of our Prime Minister even in 2001 when we had the government to expand the economy in order to ensure bigger markets are there and ensure that that penetration process takes place. Free trade agreements are certainly a way forward. Protecting the local industry, of course, able to be competitive. Now, India is a good test case. There's no point being fearful of trying to go into 1 billion people's market when Sri Lanka has only 20 million people. So that there is no fear, but only thing is you have to position yourself well. And I believe that this is the best way forward to open our economy. The second question that begs is the input costs, as I said. The electricity rates are far too high. The bank interest rates, once again, negative to compete in the region. You have 2-3% in India. Bangladesh is 3-4%, and we have quite a high rate. The small and medium sector needs to get involved in the process of that export development process. And we believe the overall legal framework will be put to place that will be able to compete evenly among the region. So I think the chambers, as my Prime Minister mentioned, needs a mindset change. The government is a friendly government, willing to assist. We are not a government that thinks that we know it all. We like to learn from the chambers. Of course, it should be with a national priority, not to have a backroom approach to say as to how my company should improve. It's how our economy must go forward. And that's where my Prime Minister has given instructions to us. So we have a cabinet of ministers, collective responsibility. Each one knows what they do, and systems go.
Thank you, Minister. Prime Minister, a few questions from the floor. You spoke about the importance of factor markets and reforms. Can you briefly elaborate what sectors these reforms will be targeted towards?
Well, virtually, I think every sector. We look in the labor and we'll have an employment council, tripartite, which will discuss about pay, how we tackle the issue of productivity increase, the skills for workers, the employment relations. That will be the employment council, the government at its very senior level, private sector at the senior level, and the trade unions, where policy issues will be discussed. Firstly. Secondly, on land, we'll make land transactions that much more easier, from registration to ownership, so that both all investors will have a level playing field in access to lands for development. We can talk about the financial markets, the financial services. Much, much more has to be done in those areas. You make your suggestions. I mean, we have to open up. But the fact is, some of the resistance will come from the private sector. In the first round of opening, the resistance may have come from the labor. But the second round, I think it is going to come. So you all have to discuss among yourself how we are going to respond to the opening of factor markets. And if necessary, we can look at the we can consult you in setting the priority for this.
I can assure you, Prime Minister, the Ceylon Chamber will always take a Sri Lanka first approach. We do understand what you're saying about some of the private sector, some in the private sector, but I can assure you the Chamber has grown a little bit beyond that now. Prime Minister, you touched on this subject during your speech, so I'll take this question. Corruption was mentioned, but we didn't see enough steps taken in the 200 days. A lot of media blitz. What steps will a future UNFGG government take to curtail corruption, legally and by action?
Well, we've started the FCID, but FCID has to be a combination of legal, business, and police investigations. Now, unfortunately, to do that, you require laws like the Serious Frauds Office in UK. Secondly, if you look at the corruption that's taken place, it's very, very sophisticated. And our investigators themselves have to be trained. So we've done a crash program of sending them out to, as I mentioned, to the other foreign countries, to UK, to the India, to USA, World Bank. So we are training the group up. In the meantime, they've got 200 complaints, of which they've gone through about 20, and then when they were coming to a close on a few of them, some of the affected parties went to court. There were stay orders. So we said, let's take all of them up in September and get a final ruling on this issue. The other one is that we are a party to the UN Convention against corruption, but we have not legislated the convention. Now that will give us a much stronger legal powers. Then we'll have the trained personnel, and we'll have to have a new institution to replace the bribery, the allegations of bribery or corruption commission. We had 1,900 files laid by 250 different vacancies that hadn't been filled. At the moment, there's a deadlock between the commissioners and the Director General. Director General had 50 police officers to fill vacancies. The commissioners have turned it down. They have stopped the foreign training. So all purposes, the commission is defunct, and we decided on appointing new members after the elections. So we are going ahead, and the groundwork has been done, and you will see the results as we go along. Obviously, it must be hitting people because they're all shouting revenge, revenge, revenge from the election platforms.
Finance Minister, a bit of a challenging question here. Your policy on SEPA, and expand that also, policy on free trade agreements in general.
Well, it's a government policy which was spelled out. If we need to have a robust export diversification approach like what you're saying, we need to have bigger markets. And India is one of the friendly nations that have opened themselves up. But only problem is there are sometimes there are non-tariff barriers that come in and have a problem. That is the fear our exporters have. We need to clear that. And I'm sure the diplomatic relationships exist between Sri Lanka and India is so good at this moment. We should take currency of that and ensure that we place our exporters in a position, in a fighting position, to take a market share that is there. Now, that doesn't mean that we just open our markets up for nothing. There should be reciprocity. Service sector is certainly an area that we can take advantage. I'm talking of my profession on the accounting field. Certainly, we have a bigger challenge going in there and take a share of them than they coming here into a 20 million market and we take what? So I would say that the mindset needs to be created that we have got to look at the challenge that you have imposed on us, which the Prime Minister just responded. Are you ready to take that challenge on? We are just talking of 12 billion, 13 billion export at the moment, 14% of GDP. So on that basis, I'm sure CEPA vis-a-vis with free trade agreements should be looked at from our economic point of view. Not just saying we have 25 FTAs, which doesn't help. China is a good standing case. You have most amount of imports coming in. But just having a free trade agreement does not help if our exports are unable to penetrate into the Chinese market. I would say India is a good test case, and I call upon, I know the Chamber of Commerce respond very well, but call all the other chambers, small, medium, and large, in order to get to that point. And I'm sure you'll see the benefit come in quicker than later if we adopt that policy. It's not something that we are trying to thrust upon you all. We see the potential if you open it out and take the positive spirit that is there. And I guess we are there to move forward. Now, you have said 50 billion export market. You have not said when, right? So it's open-ended. We believe that we should get there as soon as possible. I wouldn't put a figure down because I think it's too premature at this moment. But if the mindset changes, I'm sure you'll see that happening very quick. Help us to help you all.
Thank you, Minister. Prime Minister and also Minister, the Chamber has consistently supported CEPA. And we will continue to do so, not just CEPA, but all free trade agreements that bring prosperity to the country. Asymmetric, hopefully, to take cognizance of the size of Sri Lanka. But the principle of CEPA and the principle of free trade agreements, the Chamber has consistently supported in the past and will continue to do so in the future as well. Prime Minister, what will be the tax policy of your government? Are you planning a low tax regime with no concessions, for example, or tax holidays? What will your tax policy be? Particularly, sir, taking into account that some expenditure was increased fairly significantly with the interim budget, and also that tax revenue as a percentage of GDP has been coming down over the last few years. What will your tax policy be?
First, increase revenue collection. Once you decide on what you are going to collect, then we'll work the taxes around it.
A very sharp response, I must say. Another question, Prime Minister, from the audience.
Suresh, do you mind if I just add on one to that Prime Minister's question? The question that was posed on the taxes. You know that this country has only 39,600 corporate tax files and only 12,100 pay tax files. So what is happening? We have 72,000 companies incorporated. Is this sufficient? You're looking at GDP coming down from 17.8% in 2004 to 10.56 as of today. You look at the revenue collection exercise. This is one thing that the Prime Minister was very firm. Just on the areas of excise. Last year, the then government projected 100 billion. Now, we were able to clean up, especially when it comes in the areas of ethanol, the areas of narcotics, all those things that are coming. We have been able to collect, just on one aspect, able to increase revenue 300% over. That was 3,300 million in 2014 December. Is now collecting 9,900 million a month. That's 6,600 billion per month. Where has it gone previously? Now, that is almost roughly 72 billion a year. So that is one-third of the projection of the excise revenue. So these are the areas, as the Prime Minister mentioned, be smart in collecting. It's not that we are unable to collect. Those taxes have not derived the revenue that is expected. Where have those gone is the question. will ensure those are collected and ensure move up to about 14-15% as of what is on today. I think we are highly taxed. It's better to have a lower tax, high compliance, and get to the targets that are imposed.
So, in other words, broaden the tax net is what you're saying rather than deepen the rates.
Well, that's what my Prime Minister and the team have been talking. And I believe that we can get more revenue out of that rather than just be saying we have 38%, 28%, or 12% to a particular sector. Let's look at it overall. If we want to, at the moment we have 510 billion in revenue coming from inland revenue, which is, I believe, is only about 45 to 50% of what should be. We should reduce the tax rates in order to get to about 900,000 billion. And that's not far away. Just the evasion. Tax planning is perfectly acceptable. Evasion is the problem.
Prime Minister, you seem to have a fan in the audience, congratulating you on a deep understanding and socially empathetic economic vision. There is a question as well. To execute this, you need skillful, smart, and modern technocrats and bureaucrats at government level. How will you ensure multiple government authorities have the people and the skills to execute this in 5 years?
Initially, it will be driven by a few units. And I presume there will be people from outside the government service also serving us.
Prime Minister, this question really I had for the Foreign Minister, but unfortunately he's not here. He couldn't attend this morning. Exports, and you also spoke of FDI. Both seem to be very much a part of your government's economic policy. How do you propose to leverage foreign policy to fulfill the objectives both on the export side as well as on the FDI?
As exports are concerned and investments, it's our economic policy. How attractive are we? And what are people willing to come and invest here? There's only a limit to which you can use foreign policy to attract investments or exports. If you are open society, then trade agreements are easy to come by. Rest is the soft diplomacy we practice, but that's more part of the exercise of political power by the state for its security, and how we again move in on issues like regional economic agreements. Now I noticed that the Trans-Pacific Partnership has broken down at the moment, the discussions on a few of the issues. But basically, it's our attraction, it's our economic fundamentals which will attract investments to come into the country, and our competitiveness which will decide where our exports go to.
Minister, what are the financial sector reforms which will be looked at during the next few years? It's a question directly to you.
Well, I think, let me get that to the Prime Minister to answer that. That may be better because overall view. Well, coming on the areas of tax reforms, in the areas of the entities that are basically involved in decision-making process, we believe that the necessary power needs to come in to those type of areas. And we will certainly look at giving the brief to the areas where it's required. My concern on the areas of revenue is the most important thing. And I believe that motivational approach given to the company. Because there was a myth that was spread among many of the upper element of the business community that we were coming to take one element, bashing them. You would see over the 191 days of government that it has been a very friendly government towards the investors. We have been meeting the chambers, responding to their needs, doing business fees. You posed a question to the Prime Minister. He instructed us to have this meeting. We had 4 meetings that were going on. And in that process, we had 91 questions posed to us. 86 of them have been solved. So some of the areas in labor needs dramatic changes, because you would see that the labor has responded well. One of our biggest problems were able to motivate the government sector, because there was a perception they were underpaid, overworked. I don't believe in that for sure, but certainly we motivated them. We put them into correct spirit. We will ensure there are many other things that the government has been planning to do so, and it will reveal after, God willing, the 17th of August gives us a massive mandate. And with that process, we'll bring the motivational spirit that is there in the labor, financial area, and also the outward-looking approach of the economy. That is where problems are, because many, on the areas of land, there is a problem that is perceived saying that we are unfriendly on this area. But I believe also, if we just open it out, you'll have the 2001 wave of foreigners coming and buying in land and also pushing the prices up, not allowing the domestic owners to go forward. But if there is good investments coming in, we'll certainly look at opening up the areas that is beneficial. If there's a, say, 1 billion investment that comes in, and if land is a barrier, certainly we'll look at giving into those type of things. But just not opening up, because I think the last government did certainly a good thing in certain areas. I mean, just because we're in government, we don't need to bash the opposition just for nothing. There were certain good merits that are there. We'll work upon the goodness of that and ensure for the betterment of the economy. But we want the investors to look at the thing from a much broader perspective, able to take challenge in the region, and then get on to the world.
Minister, this question also I'll put to you. What is the government's view and vision on protecting domestic industries which are uncompetitive in global markets?
Well, I think this is one of the biggest areas that we need to tackle. There is a general perception, the small and the medium feel that opening out would be a threat to them. But there have been, the small and the medium have really moved up. They're able to take the pressure on. And all what we have done is to help them, give a help up. And that's the way to go forward. So protecting doesn't mean that you just put a blanket cover, no imports on those areas. We take the input cost away and able to make them more competitive. Sometimes it's just that duty aspect is not the problem. It is the financial aspect that is there. Many of the banks are here. They make billions. But they don't put to society what is expected of them. I guess the banks must take a much bigger risk than what they're taking at the moment. You know, you go to get a billion rupees from them, they'll ask a 3 billion asset. That's not what is required. The small and the medium, if they're assisted, they can compete very well with our regional districts. So I guess the protective element would come in if it meets with the national obligations that we have set as a government, and if that helps in order to ensure that there's a protective element on the areas of imports, certainly. But for the sake of just putting a protective element, just to have no competition for them, that won't be the case. Example is in the areas of tiles, example in the areas of steel. You know, the input costs have gone up almost by about 4%, just for protecting this. Now, if you have that opened up, you will have a much more robust construction area that is going. Cement. We were able to reduce a bag of cement by 100 rupees, and we have proposals seeing that it can come down much better. Now, just because you have a domestic industry does not mean that you have got to pay it at the expense of construction industry. Steel likewise, tile is the same. You have BY 32 negative items on the negative list. I think this should be brought to about 25, but religiously administered thereafter. You know, not just to have it as a negative list and give exemptions just because somebody comes and smiles louder and broader than somebody else. That should be what the government policy is. You know, not personal patronage, but ensured as a national oriented approach. So we'll certainly be very responsive in that. And I'm sure many of you all have come forward and have seen that it is absolutely clean and helpful towards the industry.
I'll remember not to smile in front of you.
From the areas of beer, or what is it?
Minister, this question also, I mean, you've been speaking about government debt, so I'll put this question to you. Given the revised GDP growth data, how is Sri Lanka's debt repayment prospects, particularly foreign debt?
Well, if you look at this, if you take your mind back to 2005, January 1, the total public debt was 1,784 billion. Of that, 52% was domestic and 48% was foreign. Since then to today, we have increased our public debt to 8.9 trillion. It was looked at 7.6 trillion, but it has been at 8.9 trillion. Today, the foreign component is very high. And that's the reason why you need to have a very realistic exchange rate, just not reacting to those type of things, and able to have export-led growth will help in the long run to come to the point of having a strong rupee. Now, at this particular moment, the foreign borrowing is 48%. And of that, the general average borrowing cost has been about 5.9% as an interest rate. Now, we have been, over the last 4 or 5 months, owing to the cohabitation between the President and the Prime Minister, the world has been looking at us in a very favorable manner. The previous commercial loans, the governments in the past have been utilizing loan obtaining, just walking into a commercial bank, taking 6 to 7% interest rate, as opposed to having certain conditional loans that are there, which can attract at 0.01 to 0.05%. Now you have new countries coming up, Japan, Korea, Qatar, European Union, World Bank is hitherto have been given in the rate of 400, 500 million, are looking at giving 2 billion. So these are the areas that we are trying to reduce debt servicing. Today, the total government revenue is 1,532 billion. Of that, normally the actual earnings have been roughly 85 to 90%. So you're talking 1,420. The debt servicing is 1,290. Capital component being 870 and the interest being 425. Now, in order to reduce the debt servicing, what we've done is to either increase the tenure of the loan or reduce the interest cost. We have been able to do both. The Prime Minister has been very instrumental in able to look at much beyond what is looked at and able to reduce the interest rates from the 5.6 average to about 2.2 will help us to put that money back into society. We, as it was told about corruption, our job is not to reduce corruption, eliminate it wholesale. There are a lot of problems that come on the way. Examples, when you're trying to create revenue, there are areas where the private sector gets involved with the government sector and able to try to collect, try to refund back revenues that have been collected. Ericanuts is one example. Not a single cent collected. We brought in, able to collect about 500 million. Here is exporters go along with the government officials, try to get it refunded. So we have to ruthlessly eliminate that and bring in that revenue.
Thank you, Minister. Prime Minister, one last question before we wind up this session. Over the last 7 months, there have been many positive changes. For example, cost of living has come down, the 19th Amendment has been brought in. However, one issue casts a shadow over your government, the so-called bond scam. Could we have your side of the story on this issue?
No, my side and your side. There can only be one side. How do you deal with allegations of corruption? Today I saw in the Daily Mirror that Daya Gamage had said that the bank governor should go. So I gave Daya Gamage a call and asked him. He said, no, I never said that. I said people who are found guilty of any offense will have to go. So the Daily Mirror added it on. Now this becomes my story. You must ask Daily Mirror how it became their story. No, what is it that we are doing? We are going for good governance. And what does good governance mean? Good governance means that you have a system, you minimize allegations, and if there are allegations, you investigate them. Now, have we done that or not? In the case of the allegations that were made on the bank bond issue, have we done it or have we not done that? And we have set down a policy, we followed that there should be an internal investigation followed up by either the police can investigate, go to courts, or a parliament. In this instance, I always said Parliament has always had control of finance and that therefore it should go into Parliament. One allegation made was that there was a big loss because the interest rates had increased. Look, we took a policy decision that there cannot be private placements unless it's urgent. We have been criticizing it in Parliament. Why can't you pay the market rates in the local market for the rupees when you are paying the market rates for the foreign bondholders? That if it makes a capital that much more expensive for the government, then the government must restructure its spending priorities. You can't be having cheap money so that you can build palaces in Jaffna and that type of thing. No, we have to pay the market rate. And when I came in and I found that the governor was not following it because the officials, some of the officials, the view that it's better to have private placement, I told him, look, I want it done from the next day onwards. There was no next day, but within 2 days or so, the next bond came. So that's the policy decision. There's no other this thing. Then, did this go out? Did anyone get any leakage? That's what we had to, we appointed a committee. The committee was headed by 3 lawyers. They were called UNP lawyers. There are no other allegation. I can't find SLFP lawyers, certainly not after the last presidential election. I asked them to report back on it. After I got the report, the report said they said there was no allegation against the governor. But you can look into it. The perpetual treasuries had some dealings, especially with the Bank of Ceylon and others. In the meantime, some of the parties went to court and made serious allegations, a fundamental rights application, which the court dismissed. So I had a situation in which the internal investigation says there was nothing against the governor. And on the other hand, the court has dismissed a case which was against the governor. So can I ask a man to go on that basis? Will you ask anyone to go from your firm if that's the basis? The next one is, I always said the report is going to Parliament. So we are going to Parliament. I prefer the select committee, but the Speaker appointed a subcommittee of COPE, and they have taken evidence. I think the governor has given evidence, the previous governor, many others have given, but it concluded without a report for the simple reason we had elections, and the chairman refused to call the members of the committee which gave the report. I mean, you prepare a report for Parliament, and then you don't call the members who prepared the committee report. There were further investigations to come because they found that there was some, the relationship between perpetual treasuries and the central bank under the previous administration. So there was a big question as to whether information could have got out in many ways or not, which our MPs wanted to investigate. And finally, I had to be called to give evidence. Again, Mr. Gunasekaran was ducking that. So we've decided, all the parties which comes under the UNP, that we will we'll appoint a select committee, and we will go ahead. All those who served in this select committee and who are re-elected will serve in that committee together with others decided by party leaders, and they can investigate this fully. So how did they get in? If you have any information which others haven't about the governor or any other official, you are free to come and give that. If you have any information about any employee of perpetual treasuries, whatever you know about him or her, you can always convey to the select committee. So it's been done in the open. Now what more can I do? I'm not going to reply to all the charges that were made because I think the Parliament must decide on it. And certainly the three members who have served on the committee has refuted many of the charges that has been made. So I have set down the procedure, and we have done an investigation. And we've done 3 investigations. Earlier, on central bank, nothing was investigated. So with the central bank or the treasury or any other ministry, the criteria is laid, and we are going through, and we will certainly continue it. And you all are free to come and give evidence, and the report will be done in a very professional manner.
Suresh, do you mind just adding on one to that? I mean, you talk of on this bond matter, it has become hysterical. It's the only one these guys crying from every state that is possible. Look at what went on the Greek bonds. Look at what went on the hedging. Hedging 33 billion loss of the taxpayers' money. Nobody questions on that. I mean, you're looking at a contingent liability of 66 billion. We were trying to look at trying to reduce petrol further, but it is stuck going to the fact that each litre has a 15 million hedging cost that is there. Why are these not being spoken of? Why is this hysterical element that has been thrown towards this? It's a notional cost that you're talking, but hedging is a direct financial outflow. So I just want the erudite businessmen that are here to just look at that as well. Put into pond. I mean, you had Nivad Cabral come into debate. He had 2.5 hours, didn't speak 5 minutes on that. You have Bandul Gunawa that came to debate, not 3 minutes on that. So it's just being thrown around. It's the only one that cast against us. So I just want to put that to point of view.
Thank you. Just before we conclude, if I might sum up, exports for Sri Lanka are absolutely vital. And what does that mean from a private sector perspective? It means that the private sector needs to compete and win in overseas markets. To compete and win in overseas markets, we need to first compete and win in our home turf. If we don't do that, there is no way that we can be competitive overseas. So be ready, I believe, be ready to face competition from different sources within our own country. And I think fundamentally, the message to the private sector must be that don't bank your future on a foundation which is built on protectionism. Be competitive, be productive, and be ready to compete in export markets. Honourable Prime Minister, Honourable Minister, thank you very much for being here to inaugurate the summit. It was a privilege to have you. Before we wind up, Samantha, may I invite you, Chairman, to offer a token of our appreciation to the Prime Minister and the Minister. Thank you.